Welcome to Draconian, your podcast for news and updates in Hong Kong and Taiwan. I'm your host, William.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 14 of the Draconian podcast. This is your host, William. This week's episode will be all about conflicting values, as this has shaped this week's events in Hong Kong and Taiwan. From the national security law in Hong Kong to a survey about the invasion of Taiwan, this region is riddled with conflicting narratives and values this week. If you would like to learn more about news and updates about Hong Kong and Taiwan, please subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions, you can also email us with your own question or suggestions at william@draconianpod.com. So, from this week onwards, the episode art has also been updated and will be used from this episode. And thanks everyone for the patience, as we are still rolling out the launch of our updated visuals in phases. So now back to what we are talking about topics about Hong Kong and Taiwan. First of all, we will talk about Hong Kong, and we will discuss events and topics and news that happened in Hong Kong last week. So first of all, it is about an application of the national security law in Hong Kong. A girl born in Hong Kong was charged with sedition of its conspiracy to overturn the authority of the Chinese government. The girl was charged with sedition for posts commented in Japan when she was learning in Japan for her pro-independence and mockery against the Chinese central government. This is actually the importance of this event is that this is the first application, or its first charge against people to test the extraterritorial effect for what the national security law is, which is basically mandated under its Article 38 of the national security law. This is also first time that this was done against Hong Kong citizens, where the act itself was carried out of Hong Kong. Under Article 38 of the national security law, it actually has provided the technical legal claim and framework for the national security law to apply to anyone, anywhere in the world, or anyone, anywhere in the globe, or in space, or in the Milky Way, technically. However, this national security law is also technically against basically non-Hong Kong citizenship for it carried out not in Hong Kong. For example, if you're a US citizen that carried out so-called pro-independence stance in the United States, you are also chargeable under the national security laws under this Article 38 or 39. So this news itself is actually quite problematic, or it's as it is actually the first application in charging people, or in successfully charging people, where actually there are other various applications or other various cases which the national security law has actually opened the case, has also been actively finding the person with basically a bounty notice against the heads of the 8 people, which we all know they placed 300,000 against the 8 people, against them on this conspiracy to collude with foreign governments to sanction individuals from Hong Kong. So, it is basically a very conflicting value, as this application of national security itself has been in conflict in Hong Kong and in Western liberal way. So, the way for how national security laws are applied in Hong Kong is more in the case, or more in the sense of how the Chinese ways of considering the idea of harmony. So, the traditional Chinese values consider harmony itself as the harmony of the society over the harmony of the people or anything else. However, as it is now a communist government with communism itself, which emphasizes party security or parties' control over the community, over the society. It technically means, or it technically creates, a unique blend of communism, emphasize an absolute control of the society in all regards, with an idea of the party as a country, with the idea of national security of not only the country itself, but also the Chinese Communist Party in whole. This basically contradicts to the original idea, or contradicts to norm within Hong Kong, where they consider the harmony, of the people itself actually prioritized over the society, which is basically a more Western way of identifying national security, where national security itself protects the rights of the people more than the right of the state as an idea. In Western values, they consider the rights of individuals, for example, the rights of them free of espionage against a foreign government, over the idea of the country itself. So you get all the NSA, Snowden cases, and etc. And the idea of why they consider, why the Chinese consider the West as an evil idea, as basically it uses national security to so-called create hate, of how US applies it to create hate against the United States. Where in the Western society they do not do so, as the idea of national security of the people itself is not because they consider national security of the people over the party. So there are not a lot of hate directed against the national security cases, related to China or related to or that were heard in China, as basically those cases is more about them trying to strive for their own security or their own harmony over the country or over basically the state as a whole. So this is about the first piece of topic, the first large events that happened or that occupied headlines in Hong Kong last week. So now this is the second event that happened in Hong Kong last week. This is about the US Senate. So US Senate members across the House and Representatives basically plan to sanction prosecutors and judges who engaged in prosecution and unfair treatment of cases related to the application of the national security law. For example, the case of the 47, which is a pan-democracy primary that was held in 2020, the Apple Daily, and the 2019 protest. So basically, they are introducing plans, or they're introducing a bill to sanction these individuals who actively engage in the prosecution, the loss of rule of law, the manipulation of law, and the manipulation of order, to charge people who were engaged in pro-democratic protests in 2019. So basically, this means that they are basically trying to to seize any idea of so-called creating a harmonic atmosphere in the China-US relations. So this plan was actually unveiled last Thursday, while at the same time, it also created a lot of problems, I would say, especially in the case of extraterritorial effect, and basically the idea of national security laws application of Article 50, where basically if so-called they can put these cases into China, or they can transfer the authority of national security laws, cases related to the national security laws, to China to do all the trial and basically to put them in Chinese jail instead of jails in Hong Kong. And it also created a very strong opinion from Hong Kong's pro-establishment groups and also patriotic communist groups that support the Communist parties. For example, they staged protests in the American consulate in Hong Kong. They used various news outlets to voice their own opinion, and they tried to portray this whole thing as something that is mandatory only because of all the undue influence, the idea of color revolution from the United States against China. As a result, basically, they also stated that if the US do this, then they can put the people in China to trial, and this is not good. And basically, this is not good not because of the people are being tried in China, but actually because of the economic implications, where basically foreign companies would leave because of how this national security law is technically implemented. And considering the whole short period of how this was written and how this was applied, so there would actually be fear for how these laws are applied and how they can influence local politics and even how they influence the local economy, as Hong Kong is a more international city, which means that most of the services are directed at trade, directed at foreign trade, directed at import, export, and re-export, which actually requires a very solid independent judicial system, which Hong Kong is actually technically, when you consider people in Hong Kong, they consider they do not have it, but basically it's still considered as independent outside of Hong Kong. So basically, if this bill was not implemented, this means that US companies will technically be able, or they have the reason, they have the warning from the United States to leave Hong Kong as soon as possible, to not use Hong Kong as a trading hub anymore. So basically, this affected Hong Kong's economy, and that is technically why there was very strong opinion from across the pro-establishment groups in Hong Kong and even the government itself. So basically, it also shows another idea of like sanctions itself. So in this part of conflicting values, we'll discuss about sanctions. So sanctions, the sanction game itself was played both basically across the world, across Hamas, across Israel, across European Union, across the United States, across Russia, basically all over the world. However, this sanction and counter-sanction game actually shows, or actually considers, or basically it shows how various countries utilize sanctions as an economic weapon to portray its power and to protect its own national interests. In fact, China also technically sanctioned various US officials, think tanks, and other communities, politicians, etc., on this now intention to subdue China, to so-called drive color revolution. With technically, they do not have a legislative an outline or a guideline or a reason or a framework on sanctioning, but actually this is what the United States are trying to do. So this is also another part of the conflicting values, where China and the United States, where the Western and the Eastern society have the most, they are trying to have this whole conflict of the values of how they are doing things, of how they consider things, and on how things are done. So last of the topics about Hong Kong is about the gay games in Hong Kong. So the gay games in Hong Kong, 2022 actually, postponed a year due to the pandemic, was opened last week in Hong Kong. So this is all actually the first time a city in East Asia has hosted the gay games. However, there are very strong opinions from local conservatives who consider or who uphold traditional family values and consider this whole gay games thing is something that are against national security law. with even legislators claiming this whole thing violates the national security law. Regina Yip, convener of the Executive Council and also a member of the Legislative Council, opened the games last week as basically the main attendee, and she stated that hosting the games actually does not equate to the protection of marriage rights of LGBT people in Hong Kong. So it is also not about anything that is related to the national security law, as basically this is a games, it is a sports event, or in Hong Kong's gay games, it's more about people having fun in Hong Kong. So there are like traditional sports events, but there are also events that are not traditional at all. For example, mahjong, mahjong in Cantonese, mahjong in Chinese, or go. These are some of the items or some of the events that the gay games will host. Furthermore, the gay games itself is also not limited to people who are openly gay or who are gay. So it is more of an inclusive event. It is more about an equity, diversion, and inclusiveness within Hong Kong, or Hong Kong as a society that meets to serve the interests of both China and the world. So, the conflicting values here is about the traditional values. So the traditional values in the Eastern society is different from that of the Western society. So in the idea of East Asian societies, the idea of families must consist of males and females. This does not equate to one male or one female as claimed by some of the people who oppose the games itself, but it also means that basically a family itself must consist of males and females. So you can have a male with another female and form a family. That is a more poor people sense in Asian China, or males with multiple females in case of rich Asian China, or in multiple females and male in Tang Dynasty, for example. So you get all these conflicting values. However, in the West, it's more liberal. So in the Western society, it's more about love. It's more about the name of love, the name of unity, the name of inclusiveness. So if this thing do not affect the society as a whole, for example, two males form a family, then they consider this as something that is acceptable in the Eastern, in the Western world, or in the Western sense. That's why gay marriage was like being done or being legalized in a lot of Western societies, not because of them supporting the gay people, but more of them supporting the idea of a city or not a city, of a family or diversity, of equality. So in this week's Hong Kong, it's mostly about these events. There are also some less important events, but basically those events were covered in last week's episode. So there aren't a lot of new developments for those events. So those will not be updated in this week's events. So yeah, so this is more about this part of the episode about Hong Kong, about the conflicting values of the idea of countries, families, freedom, and the society in Hong Kong. So this is the end of part 1 of episode 14 of the Draconian podcast. And now, back to part 2 of this episode. So in this part of the episode, we'll be discussing a possibility of the war, of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the presidential and legislative elections updates for next year's election, the idea of how it affects the ban on China-bound tour groups or Taiwan-bound tour groups from China, and also the idea of foreign ties with the Baltic states with Taiwan. So let's start. So first, this is about at last week's poll or in last week's announcement of a poll, roughly 70% of Taiwanese people would want to fight in case of a Chinese invasion in the island. It was claimed by a U.S. Air Force China's and Taiwan Affairs Program Director, which this whole piece of paper was published on Thursday in a think tank based in Washington. In it has stated that 70% of the people would fight, while 20% would basically leave as soon as possible, while the remaining 10% of the population currently residing in Taiwan would welcome and favor the Chinese Communist Party and consider them as a liberator and consider them as being oppressed currently. So this is a conflicting idea about, so for this short piece of news, there are quite a lot of conflicting values that we can discuss. So first, the idea between peace and war have been higher than ever, and the stakes have been higher as China has been crossing the middle line of the strait more frequently since the start of the pandemic, as the idea to show force, to show muscles, to train for a possible way or a possible event of an invasion of Taiwan as a result. So they are also, as various opposing sides, they are also trying to shape the narrative of a possible invasion of Taiwan by China, with China considering Taiwan as part of a sovereign state, as it claims Taiwan as a part of China, and claims a lot of people in Taiwan would actually want to unite with China when China rules over them. While people currently residing in Taiwan actually aspires the rights that they currently enjoy related to its rights, its freedom, its state of travel, and its idea as a de facto independent state. So basically, this clash in the values have actually shaped the current political landscape in Taiwan, as shown in different parties having their main labels not as its idea of society or it's as a left-leaning party or a right-leaning party, but instead it's more about the main issue, the main political, economic and social issue is not about how the government should be run, but it is actually more about reunification versus Taiwan independence versus so-called retaining the current status quo. So basically, after 17 years, the then anti-communist party, the Chinese Kuomintang, was now considered as a pro-unification party, while the current ruling governments, the Democratic Progressive Party, was viewed as the pro-independent party, but now is more or less as a pro-status quo party. And this is about, basically this is also about internal politics, with influence campaigns in China, with malinformation, disinformation, or mock-up information, and various other pieces of these fake news, etc., with Taiwan actually under threat. So there are various conflicting values in Taiwan, but basically this piece of news shows this event actually showed the conflicting values within the island of how the island should be run. Should it be run as an independent sovereign state, or as a province, or a highly autonomous province claimed by China, or guaranteed or claimed by China at that time, which are technically also saffron. So this is about the first part of the Chinese of the first event that actually affected Taiwan. Now it's about the second event, or the second quite broad-based event. So this is about updates to the presidential and legislative elections in 2024. So the plans to integrate the opposition are still technically in full swing. However, from various opinion polls conducted by various independent parties, it actually has showed the second choice for the opposition for all parties of the opposition is not the other party that they're claiming or they're trying to integrate, but instead as terror goal. Both the Taiwan People's Party, led by Dr. Ko, and the Chinese Kuomintang, chaired by Chu, basically also all get considered carry goal as the second choice. However, there are still no concrete deadlines, no integration plans. There are only technically so-called 原则 or so-called principles of cooperation, which here they consider the whole cooperation as to remove the DPP from power. So, as a result, DPP's candidate, the chair of the Democratic Progressive Party, Vice President William Lai, mocks this whole integration plan as a mockery and at the same time as what the Chinese Communist Party wishes to see. So this is about some quick updates. However, this week's top spotlight is not about the presidential elections. It's more about the legislative elections. So, the Taiwan's People's Party, with Ko as a leader, have basically included a person who have a very pro-unification stance with China into the party ticket, which has topped this week's news on elections for the legislative yuan. In here, basically, the Taiwan People's Party, as it upholds the idea of transparency, basically pushes the candidate to face public scrutiny in the start of this week. And basically, Monday and Tuesday, they have said that they have answered, or the possible candidate has been actively answering different claims, accusations. Technically, they are not. They are basically events that the candidate had done in previous years on how they colluded with the United Front workers of the Chinese Communist Party. So actually, this is a conflict within the value, again, with the conflicting value of reunification with China versus status quo versus independence. So the opposition is technically still trying to integrate and unite under one piece of banner, but there aren't any technical value. Instead, it is an aspiration of not letting the Democratic Progressive Party to continually rule the country, instead of a concrete plan to, for example, forge socio-economic improvements. They don't have them. They just have an idea of just push the DPP out of power to rule the island by themselves. However, the Penguins, actually, they have the idea of Team Taiwan as an election slogan. In this idea of Team Taiwan, they envision Taiwan as a sovereign independent state, which ironically was what China supported in the 1950s, but opposed staunchly now. And here, the idea of the Democratic Progressive Party is to aspire Taiwan or to bring Taiwan to the globe. The idea of using the slogan is to bring Taiwan, or to make Taiwan to become a small but important player within international politics, which actually they're trying to do so. And in various case of success, for example, as semiconductor, tourism, and others, they are trying to improve its position over China, as basically now more and more countries consider China as a bully, but Taiwan as a partner. So they also frame this whole presidential elections as an idea of progressive values versus a party-run country, or in Taiwan's case, 党国体制, or in Cantonese, 黨國體制, which basically it it encapsulates how Taiwan was run in the 1950s to 1980s. So basically, the lack of values, the lack of so-called 中心思想, or in English, is more about your central message, or the core message of your election platform, or the core idea of why you're running them, for the integration had actually led to integration being part failure. In Western democracies, these oppositions, they may run under one party ticket, but they do have a plan, they do have a reason. But in Taiwan's case, it's more about them just claiming that the DPP was ruling the country without very concrete evidence, with a lot of allegations, but most of them are not proven right, and just pushing them out and saying that you should vote for us because we will fix them, we will use any means to fix all the issues, instead of an vision for the country. For example, what will the country be in 30 years, in 50 years, in 20 years? They do not have them. There aren't any idea of this thing. So it created a lot of problems, I would say. So this is about the second piece of news. The third piece of news is about a government policy change. So Taiwan is actually set to lift ban on China-bound tour groups from March next year. This ban was actually in place in Taiwan's side since the start of the pandemic. First, due to transparency issues for how the Communist Party dealt with the pandemic outbreak in the initial outbreak in Wuhan, then more due to political issues for the sake of for the sake of infiltration of like Taiwan people in Taiwan. So this actually this actually seems to be a bid by the current ruling DPP government, to rally support for the party from tour guides who mainly supported the Chinese Kuomintang and served Chinese tourists from the People's Republic of China before 2016. So basically, this is a conflicting idea or a conflicting value versus like votes versus national security. So there is a delicate balance between the two, as national security is more about the state, like the state itself as a secure state, versus like the idea of but people voting. So you need support to rule a country in a democratic society. However, to rule a country, to defend the values of democracy, sometimes you may do something that is so-called anti-democratic. And there is a delicate balance between the safeguards of democracy versus ways to remove the voices from the people. So the DPP has actually long been facing a choice on the votes, or on voters, on their own voter base, and basically on attracting voters who actually they have economic ties with the People's Republic of China. So the main reason for this extended ban was actually done for the name of national security, especially on infiltration possibilities, the possibilities of war, etc. And as a direct result of China never pledged to resolve the cross-strait relations or the cross-strait issue with peace. So, in fact, China still do not pledge to reunify Taiwan with peace. They only state that they will try to do so instead of restricting the whole thing. So basically, this was also a little bit background here. So China was actually one of the largest source of tourists and contributors to the GDP of the tourist industry before 2016, when it was ruled by the Chinese Kuomintang. After 2016, the rule of the Democratic Progressive Party over the island had led to China gradually restricting tourists going to Taiwan, with a complete ban in 2020 after the start of the pandemic related to international health reasons. So lastly, we'll talk this about the last event. This is about the plans of Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs to strengthen ties with the Baltic states. These two regions are connected through the deep opposition to Russian imperialism and Chinese neocolonialism, or the idea of a grand united theory. In here, they're more about independence, it's more about various sovereign states, and it's more about unified states. As a result of all of these updates, or as a result of coercion from China, Lithuania opened a Taipei trade office in 2021. After 2 years, after 2 years, now it has been in turn for Estonia to allow Taiwan to establish a representative office. So after this Estonia establishment of a representative office in enabling Taiwan to have establish an office, it means that in all the Baltic states there will be a Taiwan representative office. So this is actually the second to Lithuania, where Taiwan opened a specific trade office in 2021 for the sake of economic relations. So the idea of basically this is a result, or this is the direct result of conflicting values in these two regions. So, or the idea of the state itself, the statehood itself. So, in the Baltics or in Taiwan, state itself is united with a common value. So there is the reason for why states exist is because they have a common value. They have a common value system. They have a common goal. They have a common aspiration. They have a common language. They have a common background. Language is not the main important thing here, but they have a common background. They have a common land. In these cases, they consider local authority, or they consider the opinion of the people a lot. So there won't be a lot of, for example, central government. They do not control a lot of things. They control parts of things, but they do not control a lot. However, their neighbors, they do not. They envision a top-down approach to governance. It means that the central government will basically have most of the power. For example, Russia, the central government basically owns a lot of national enterprises. They run them. They control those enterprises. They control how the so-called individual federated states run. They have a very high degree of control. This is the case in China, which basically the central government controls basically everywhere, every province. They control everything in the province, and basically they are subdued to a very centric power structure. And also about the idea of about something values on independence versus harmony. So in China and Russia, they envisage or they prioritize the idea or the harmony of the state over the harmony of the people. So for example, people are here, or people here are now done, or they are born to serve for the state instead of the state serving for the people. So this difference in how the values, or how different people feel their values, had actually created a very unique bond of Taiwan and the Baltics, which they have a so-called common type of bully. And actually this was so-called further this whole feeling, or this whole theme was further strengthened, or the idea was further strengthened by the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine, meddled in Middle Eastern affairs, colluded with China. China supported Russia in this invasion. Everyone knew it, but there aren't any. Everyone knew it. They knew it. We knew it, but they just still continue to do it. Versus them as a so-called smaller neighbor who were historically bullied. And the Baltic state was like conquered by the USSR, Russian Empire, etc. Or for Taiwan is more about the current economic coercion by China. So the idea of reunification and the idea and the aspiration of so-called historical lands has actually created the base of this whole problem. As a result, they had tried to basically make this whole thing, or they tried to find a way to forge a common value. They use their own common values. They have a common value of independence, of mutual friendship, to establish different trade offices, and to establish so-called non-official relations between these two places. So in this week's Taiwan, there are quite a lot of conflicting values. So there were values related to peace and war, related to unification versus independence, related to aspirations of Taiwan itself, and also related to national security versus support of the government, which means that the so-called security of the family versus security of the state. So this is all about news and topics and events that happened in Hong Kong and Taiwan last week. We hope you find this episode informative. If you do, please subscribe to our podcast so don't miss a single episode anymore. We'll be continually improving different episodes, and we'll be improving the structure. If you have any feedback, comments, suggestions, or even something that you want us to cover, please let us know in the comments, or drop us an email at william@dragonianpod.com. Okay, thanks for everyone for listening. We will be back next week with more events, more news, more analysis, and a common topic that basically dominated the news headlines in Hong Kong and Taiwan. Have a safe, prosperous, and happy week ahead. Goodbye.